When the doctor told me that my lungs were being consumed by idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and that I had only 8 months left to live, I decided I couldn't take the weight of this story with me. Perhaps telling it is my last chance for liberation before I meet my grandfather in heaven and my father in the hell he built for himself. Good morning, my dear ones. My name is Lucilla Marie Sanders, but everyone here in Millbrook, Indiana knows me as Miss Lou from the park. I'm 82 years old, and every wrinkle on this face carries a different story, some of joy, others of pain. Today, I'm going to share with you the story that marked my life the most, something I've never told completely, not even to my children. But before I continue, I'd like to ask for a moment of your attention. If this old lady here has touched your heart in any way, leave an amen in the comments. Each message from you strengthens my spirit on this final journey that God has determined. And tell me which city you're watching from. I love imagining how the internet can carry my voice to places I've never been able to visit. If you can, click that like button my granddaughter says is important. Now let's get to the story. I was born in 1943 in a simple house with wooden floors on the edges of Mill Creek. Back then, our town was just a dot on the map, where everybody knew everybody, where gossip ran faster than creek water, and where family secrets were buried deeper than the roots of the old oak trees. My mother, Grace, was a beautiful woman with fair skin and long hair that reached her waist. She worked as a seamstress, always hunched over that black singer that creaked day and night, making dresses for ladies and shirts for men. She smiled little, spoke even less. Today I understand that her silence wasn't temperament. It was fear. My father, Walter, worked at the town's only sawmill. He was a tall man with large, heavy hands, respected on the street and feared at home. He had what they called a strong temper. But today, I know to call it by its right name. He was a cruel man, one of those who brings sweetness to his lips when in public and venom to his fists when the door closes. And then there was my grandfather Joseph, my mother's father. Oh, my grandfather. When I close my eyes, I can still smell the tobacco that permeated his clothes, still see those blue eyes like the July sky, still hear that laugh that sounded like music. He lived with us after my grandmother passed, occupying the small room at the back that faced the yard. He was a retired mason, but his hands never stopped creating. He made wooden stools, rag dolls, small toys that colored my childhood with hues my father insisted on erasing. My grandfather was who really raised me, even though we all lived under the same roof. He was the one who waited for me to come home from school, who taught me letters when the teacher said I was too slow, who kissed my scraped knees and said that a child's pain passes faster than morning dew in the sun. Little Lucy, he always said, some people are born with sunshine in their chest, and some are born with storms. Your father was born with a storm. It's not his fault, but don't let his rain dampen your joy. My father humiliated me for any reason. If I got bad grades, it was because I was dumb as a mule. If I dropped a glass, it was because I was clumsier than a cow on ice. If I took too long to do a task, I was lazy like your worthless mother. Nothing I did was right. Nothing about me deserved praise, encouragement, a real father's look. The punishments were frequent and cruel. I remember kneeling on corn kernels for hours because I had answered back without meaning to. Being locked in the dark room without dinner because I had laughed during dinner. Getting the belt on my hands until they were red because I was 5 minutes late from school. My mother watched it all with lowered eyes, her hands always trembling slightly, like spring leaves. She never interfered directly. She didn't have the strength for that. But at night, when my father was asleep, she would tiptoe to my bed, put some salve with herbs on the hurt places, sing lullabies softly, even though I wasn't a baby anymore. It was my grandfather who really defended me, even with his limitations as an old man facing a younger one. Walter, he would say firmly when my father raised his hand to me, if you hit the girl again, you'll answer to me. And for some reason I never fully understood, my father would back down. Maybe it was respect for elders that still existed back then. Maybe it was because deep down he knew my grandfather was right. Or maybe, and I only discovered this much later, because he depended on my grandfather's pension money that supplemented the household expenses. The days when my father worked the night shift at the sawmill were days of silent celebration. My grandfather would get the old guitar, play country songs, teach me to square dance, tell ghost stories that gave me more laughter than fear. My mother transformed, seemed like another woman. She smiled, sang along, even dared to make pumpkin candy that was the delight of my childhood. It was as if, in my father's absence, the house could finally breathe. It was my grandfather who taught me to read properly, sitting with me on the back porch while the sun set. He would get old newspapers he got from the bar owner, advertisements, anything written, and make me read aloud. "Read slowly, but read right," he'd say, "because a misread word is like medicine taken wrong. It has no effect." It was also my grandfather who nurtured my dream of one day building beautiful houses. When I was about 8 years old, he gave me a drawing notebook and colored pencils he had bought at the county fair with what little he saved from his pension. "Draw the houses you want to make when you grow up," he encouraged. And I would draw. Huge houses with round windows, houses on top of trees, houses with gardens full of colorful flowers. My father tore up several of these drawings, saying I was filling my head with nonsense, that poor girls had no future beyond getting married and having children. But my grandfather would always give me another notebook, hidden, and say, "Keep drawing, little Lucy. Those who draw the future have a better chance of building it." Life went on like this for years, in this fragile balance between the terror my father imposed and the love that my grandfather and my mother, each in their own way, tried to give me. I grew up between stumbles and tears, clinging to moments of peace like a shipwrecked person clings to pieces of wood. At 12 years old, I began to better understand what was happening in our house. One night, I woke up to muffled screams coming from my parents' room. The next day, my mother appeared with a black eye, saying she had bumped into the door frame. It was the first time I saw my grandfather cry, sitting alone in the yard, staring at nothing. When I approached, he held my hands tightly and said, "Promise me, little Lucy, that you'll never think you deserve to be hit by any man. Promise you'll be strong where your mother is weak." I promised, without fully understanding the weight of those words, but I kept them inside me, like a seed that would one day sprout and save me. My grandfather was getting old. The hands that once made perfect toys now trembled a little. His steps became more shuffled, his cough more frequent. But his eyes remained the same, blue, bright, full of that love only real grandparents know how to give. Oh my God, how it hurts to remember. But I need to tell it. If you're watching this and have a living grandfather or grandmother, go hug them today. Tell them you love them. Listen to the old stories one more time. Record in your memory that old person's smell, that way of talking. Because when they leave, they take a piece of us that never comes back. I remember, as if it were today, the last advice my grandfather gave me. I was 14 years old. It was a Sunday morning. We were sitting on the bench in the yard under the apple tree. He took my hand, looked deep into my eyes, and said, "Little Lucy, there are many people who will tell you that you can't, that you won't succeed, that poor people's dreams don't come true. Don't believe it. Your head was made to think, not to bow. Your feet were made to walk, not to kneel. And your heart was made to love, but also to fight. Never forget that." 2 weeks after that day, on a cold June morning like only Indiana knows how to be, my grandfather didn't wake up. He slept as always, lying on his side, a slight smile on his face, as if he were having a good dream, and simply didn't come back. The doctor said it was his heart. It stopped in the middle of the night, without warning, without pain, without goodbye. It was as if the sun had suddenly gone out. The house, which was already not cheerful, became even more somber. My mother cried for days, a silent cry that flowed while she sewed, while she washed clothes, while she cooked. And my father became strange. He showed no sadness at his father-in-law's death, but his eyes gained a different gleam, a gleam that later I would understand to be the worst kind of evil, the one that waits for the right moment to attack. The funeral was brief. Few attended. Some colleagues from the sawmill, the owner of the bar where he spent his salary, 2 or 3 distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. My mother, in black, remained silent throughout the ceremony, her face covered by a thin veil that hid whatever emotion she might or might not be feeling. I didn't shed tears. Not even one. At that moment, looking at the simple coffin descending into the earth in the small town cemetery, I felt neither hatred nor love, just a strange emptiness, as if a page had been definitively turned, a dark chapter closed forever. What none of us knew at that moment was that while one chapter closed, another, brighter, more hopeful, was just beginning. A chapter that would take me on paths that not even in my wildest dreams could I have imagined. A chapter that truly began a few days after the funeral, when the Sawmills lawyer called us to deal with legal matters. It was there that we discovered something surprising. My father, despite all his faults, had kept up to date the life insurance offered by the company. Insurance that, added to the accident compensation and the monthly pension we were entitled to, gave us not just immediate stability, but the concrete possibility of a dignified new beginning. It seems that even in his worst acts, God finds a way to transform into blessing, my mother commented when we left the lawyer's office. A substantial check in hand and the promise of a monthly payment that would allow us to live without luxury, but with dignity. That same day, as we walked down the main street of town, we passed a small house with a for sale sign. It was a simple construction, made of brick, with a small yard where a magnolia tree grew. My mother stopped, looked at it for a long time, and then did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She smiled a complete smile, one that reached her eyes. "What do you think, Lucila? Could it be our new home?" A week later, the house was ours. Small, simple, but ours. The first place we could truly call home, without fear, without violence, without the constant weight of oppression. And it was in that little house, under that magnolia tree that witnessed so many afternoons of study, so many shared dreams, so much laughter finally free, that my mother and I began to rebuild not just our lives, but our souls. It was there that I learned that sometimes miracles don't arrive with the blast of trumpets or angel choirs. Sometimes they come silently, disguised as tragedies, as accidents, as coincidences. They come in a fallen lamp, on a windy night, at the exact moment we need them most. And it was there, in that small but light-filled house, that my mother taught me the greatest lesson of all, that justice, when it doesn't come from the hands of men, sometimes needs to come from the hands of those who suffer most, even if the price is carrying forever the weight of a secret that can never be fully revealed. But that I'll tell you in a moment. If you've come this far, I ask you to leave a comment saying, "Stay strong, Miss Lucila," so I can feel your support in these my last months of life. May God be with us always. And if you can share with someone who also had a special grandfather in their life, I would be very grateful. God bless you, my dear ones. May the Lord cover you all with his sacred mantle. That afternoon, after we returned from the cemetery, the house seemed emptier than normal. The little room at the back, without Grandpa's guitar leaning against the wall, without the smell of tobacco, without his presence, was like an open wound I avoided looking at. Mom went to bed early, saying she had a headache. Actually, I think she couldn't stand being there, in the living room, looking at the empty chair where my grandfather used to sit every night to listen to the radio show. I stayed in the kitchen, washing the dishes from the coffee we served after the burial. My tears fell silently into the sink water, while I tried to understand how the world could keep turning without my grandfather in it. Outside, night fell quickly, as always happens in winter. That June of 1957 seemed colder than all the others I had lived through. That's when I heard my father's footsteps entering the kitchen. He had gone to the bar after the burial, something my mother didn't even try to stop. From the strong smell of liquor and the way he walked, I could tell he had drunk much more than usual. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice slurred. "She went to bed. She has a headache," I answered without turning around, continuing to wash the dishes, praying silently that he would go to sleep too. I felt when he approached. The smell of alcohol became stronger, mixed with sweat and cigarettes, a mixture that even today, so many decades later, makes me nauseous when I smell it. "You know something, Lucila?" he said, coming so close I could feel his hot breath on my neck. "Now this nonsense of Grandpa protects, Grandpa won't let, is over. Now I'm the only one who gives orders in this house." I froze, the wet plate slipping between my fingers. Something in his voice put me on alert, like a little animal that senses danger before even seeing it. "I'll finish here and go to sleep too," I said, trying to sound calm, even with my heart beating so hard it seemed like it would come out of my mouth. That's when I felt his heavy hand grab my arm forcefully, turning me to face him. "You're not going anywhere," he said, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before. It wasn't just the usual anger, it was something else. Something that made my blood freeze in my veins. "I always wanted to teach you a lesson. The old man wouldn't let me, always interfering, saying you were just a child. But look, you're not even such a child anymore." His gaze traveled over my teenage body from top to bottom in a way that made me want to disappear, made me feel dirty just from being looked at that way. "Let me go, Dad," I asked, my voice coming out too weak for my liking. His response was to squeeze my arm even tighter, pulling me down the hallway toward the room that had been my grandfather's. I tried to resist, tried to break free, but it was like fighting against a wall. He was too strong, I was too small. "No one's going to protect you now, Lucila," he said while dragging me. "The old man is gone. Your mother is too useless to do anything. Now it's just you and me." What happened in that room, in the same room where my grandfather had departed to heaven a few nights before, I never told in full detail to anyone, and I won't tell now. There are things a woman carries alone. There are pains that even words can't properly express. I can only say that on that night, while the moon hid behind clouds as if it too didn't want to see, my father destroyed what little remained of my childhood. He stole from me something he had no right to take, defiled memories that should have been sacred, transformed my grandfather's room, until then a sanctuary of love and security, into the scene of my worst nightmare. I remember looking at the window while it happened, seeing a little piece of sky between the old curtains, desperately searching for a star, for any sign that God or my grandfather were watching over me. But the sky was too dark. That night, even the stars refused to witness. When it finally ended, he left the room without saying a word, leaving me curled up in the corner like a wounded animal. I heard his heavy footsteps down the hallway, his and my mother's bedroom door opening and closing. Then silence. I stayed there I don't know for how long. Minutes, hours, time had lost meaning. The physical pain mixed with a greater pain, a wound in the soul that I knew, even in my innocence not yet completely destroyed, would never fully heal. At some point, I found the strength to get up. I stumbled to the small bathroom at the back of the house, where I washed myself with cold water, scrubbing my skin until it was red, in a futile attempt to clean myself of that horror. I cried quietly, biting my lip to not make noise, the taste of blood mixing with the salt of tears. I couldn't go back to my room, which was next to my parents'. Instead, I wrapped myself in an old blanket on the living room couch, shaking. I don't know if from cold or terror, praying all the prayers my grandfather had taught me, begging that it had just been a terrible nightmare, that the sun would rise and take away that cursed night. But when day broke, bringing that cold winter light through the window cracks, reality was still there, heavy as lead on my young girl's shoulders. It hadn't been a nightmare. It had happened, and something inside me said it would happen again unless I did something. My mother was the first to get up, as always. When she saw me curled up on the couch, she stopped for a moment, her brow furrowed with concern. "Lucila, why are you sleeping there? Did you feel sick during the night?" I looked at her, searching in the depths of my soul for the courage I needed to tell, to denounce, to ask for help. "Mom," I began, my voice trembling. "Last night, Dad, The words were too difficult, seemed stuck in my throat. How to explain the inexplicable? How to put into simple sentences something so monstrous? But I didn't need to finish. I saw on my mother's face a flash of understanding, followed by an expression I'll never forget, a mix of horror, shame, and recognition, as if she knew exactly what I was talking about, not because she imagined it, but because she had also lived through it. In Grandpa's room, I finally managed to say, tears flowing freely now. "He hurt me, Mom. Hurt me in a way." My mother dropped the basin of clothes she was carrying. For a moment, a single precious moment, I saw in her eyes something I rarely saw. Anger. A deep, visceral anger, the kind of anger only mothers feel when their young are threatened. She knelt in front of me, held my face between her hands, and said, with an intensity that surprised me, "Listen to me, Lucila. It wasn't your fault. None of this is your fault." For the first time in my life, I saw my mother as she really was. Not the weak and submissive woman I had always seen, but a woman who carried her own scars, who had been broken and mended so many times she barely recognized herself in the mirror. A woman who, despite everything, still tried to protect her young, the only way she knew how. In that brief moment of connection, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we had a chance to escape together from that hell. But the moment was interrupted by the sound of the bedroom door opening. My father appeared in the hallway, still in pajamas, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from the previous night's drinking. "What's all this commotion?" he grunted, looking at the clothes scattered on the floor that my mother had dropped. My mother got up quickly, the moment of courage evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. I saw her shoulders curve again, her spine bend under the invisible weight of fear. Nothing, Walter," she stuttered, bending down to pick up the clothes. "Lucila wasn't feeling well, slept on the couch. We're already tidying everything up." He looked from my mother to me, and I saw in his eyes that he knew. He knew I had told, or at least tried to. And the most terrible thing, he didn't care. There was a challenge in that look, a certainty of impunity that made me understand for the first time what it really meant to be completely at someone's mercy. "Better so," he replied, heading to the kitchen. "And you, Lucila, stop this nonsense and go get ready for school. Isn't it enough to be dumb? Now you're going to be lazy too? How to go to school? How to pretend normalcy after what had happened? How to sit at a desk, learn about fractions and verbs when my whole world had collapsed?" But I went. I put on my uniform, combed my hair, got my notebooks, all in mechanical movements, as if my body had disconnected from my mind. I kissed my mother on the cheek before leaving, an automatic gesture of every day. But this time, our eyes met for a second longer, a second loaded with shared pain, shame, a silent request for forgiveness from her for not being able to defend me better. That day at school, I sat at the back of the room and didn't open my mouth. The teacher called my name several times, worried about my silence, but I could barely hear. It was as if I were submerged, the sounds arriving muffled, distorted. At recess, a classmate, Marianne, who was the closest thing to a friend I had, approached, asking if I was sad because of my grandfather. I nodded, grateful for the ready excuse. It was easier for people to think my state was due only to mourning for Grandpa. The truth was too heavy to share, too shameful to pronounce. I returned home dragging my feet, wishing the path would never end. The house that was once my refuge when my grandfather was alive was now a prison, a place of constant danger. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hide threats. What I didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. When I got home, I found my mother in the kitchen, her face marked by a recent slap, her eyes swollen from crying, and my father sitting at the table waiting for me. "So, you're making up stories, are you?" he said as soon as I entered, his voice dangerously calm. "Telling lies about your own father?" I immediately realized what had happened. He had confronted my mother about our morning conversation, had extracted from her what we knew, what we had talked about. And now, with that frightening tranquility, he was accusing me of lying. "They're not lies," I managed to say, finding somewhere inside me a remnant of courage. Maybe it was my grandfather's voice echoing in memory. Maybe it was just survival instinct. "You know what you did?" The slap came so fast I didn't even see his hand moving. I only felt the impact, my face burning, the metallic taste of blood because his ring cut my lip. "Walter, please," my mother begged, getting between us. "She's just a girl. She's confused by my father's death. She doesn't know what she's saying." "Get out of the way, Grace," he growled, pushing her so hard she stumbled backward, hitting the wood stove. "This one needs to learn who's in charge here." What followed was the worst punishment I had received until then. I won't describe it in detail. There are things that are too difficult to relive, even after so many decades. I can only say that I spent the next 3 days locked in the little room at the back, which had been my grandfather's, with only a plate of food a day and a bucket for necessities. I heard my mother crying on the other side of the door, begging him to release me, that I had already learned my lesson. But he remained unmovable. In those 3 days of confinement, in the same room where I had suffered the abuse, where my grandfather had lived and died, something inside me fundamentally changed. The frightened girl gave way to another Lucila, one who began to understand that survival sometimes depends not only on enduring pain, but on planning escape, on finding cracks in the system of terror, on believing that somehow, at some point, a way out would appear. On the 3rd day, when he finally opened the door, revealing a satisfied smile at seeing me thin, dirty, with swollen eyes from crying, something in my eyes must have betrayed this internal change, because he frowned, as if seeing something unexpected. "Learned your lesson?" he asked, blocking the door with his bulky body. "Yes, Father," I replied, head down, hiding what was really going through my head. I learned, and I had learned indeed. Not the lesson he wanted to teach me, of complete submission, of accepting abuse as something normal, of paralyzing fear. I had learned that I needed to survive at any cost until I found a way out. I had learned that sometimes you need to pretend the predator has won so he'll lower his guard. I had learned that someday, somehow, justice would be done, even if I had to wait years for it. What I didn't imagine was that I wouldn't need to wait as long as I feared. Because while I was going through that particular hell, isolated in that room, my mother, that same woman I always saw as weak and submissive, was silently plotting our liberation. The days that followed were like walking on broken glass. Each step required care, constant attention, the certainty that any carelessness could open new wounds. The house where I was born and raised had transformed into a prison with invisible walls, but no less real. I returned to school routine, but I was no longer the same Lucila. The girl who once raised her hand to answer the teacher's questions, who drew colorful houses in the margins of notebooks, who sometimes even risked a shy smile, had been replaced by a silent shadow who sat at the back of the room. My eyes remained fixed on the notebook, avoiding any contact, as if afraid someone could see through them and discover my shameful secret. The teacher, Miss Helen, noticed the change. One afternoon, she called me after class, her kind eyes behind round glasses showing genuine concern. "Lucila, what's happening? Your grades have dropped. You don't participate anymore. I know you lost your grandfather, but there seems to be something more." For a brief moment, I felt the urge to tell everything, to open the floodgates of pain and let someone from outside that house of horrors, know what was happening. But then I remembered what had happened the last time I tried to ask for help. The 3 days locked in that room, my father's threats. "I'm just tired, teacher," I replied, eyes fixed on the worn wooden floor of the classroom. "With Grandpa's death, there's more work at home." It wasn't exactly a lie. There was more work indeed. My father had decided that, since I wanted to be a woman, I should take on all the household chores to relieve my mother, who now spent more time sewing for others, trying to increase the family income after losing my grandfather's pension. Miss Helen didn't seem convinced, but she didn't insist either. She just lightly squeezed my shoulder and said, "If you need to talk, I'll be here." I nodded, knowing I would never take advantage of that offer. Some things were too heavy to share, too shameful to say out loud. At home, I developed a survival system. I learned to perceive the signs that announced danger, the way my father slammed the door when he arrived, the number of empty bottles in the sink, the tone of voice he used when calling my name. I learned to make myself invisible when necessary, to hide in corners of the house, to sleep with a chair propped against my bedroom door. Mom and I rarely talked about what had happened that night after Grandpa's funeral, or about what continued to happen on nights when my father came home, especially drunk from the bar, and looked for me in the middle of the night. There was a silent conspiracy between us, a mute understanding that talking about it out loud would make everything more real, more unbearable. But some nights, when he finally fell asleep, she would come to my room. She would sit on the edge of my bed, run her hand through my tear-soaked hair, and whisper, "One day this will end, my daughter. One day we'll leave here." I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe there was a future beyond those walls, beyond that daily terror. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, hope was dwindling, like water in drought time. It was in September of that same year, almost 3 months after my grandfather's death, that things got even worse. One afternoon, coming home from school, I found my mother crying in the kitchen, her face hidden in her hands, her shoulders shaking in silent sobs. "What happened, Mom?" I asked, dropping the notebooks on the table, my heart already racing with familiar fear. She raised her face, and I saw that her left eye was so swollen she could barely open it. A streak of dried blood marked the corner of her lips. "Your father found out," she began, her voice choked. "Found out I've been saving money. A little bit each month from what I earn with the sewing. I was hiding it in an empty lard can behind the cupboard." My heart sank. I immediately understood what that money meant. It was our chance to escape, our attempt to build a way out of that hell. "He beat me, took all the money and went to the bar," she continued, wiping her face with her dress sleeve to dry the tears. "He said if I try to hide money again, it'll be much worse." I felt such intense anger that for a moment it was hard to breathe. It wasn't the first time I felt anger toward my father. That feeling had been with me for years, growing like weeds in an abandoned yard. But at that moment, looking at my mother's bruised face, at the trembling hands that worked so hard and received so little in return, the anger transformed into something darker, more dangerous. "Let's leave, Mom," I said impulsively, holding her hands in mine. "Today, we don't need money. We can walk to the city, ask someone for help, work at anything." She shook her head sadly. "It's not that simple, daughter. Where would we go? Who would shelter a woman with a girl, without money, without steady work? And your father would find us. He has friends everywhere, knows people in the police. They'd bring us back, and it would be much worse." The cruel reality of her words hit me like a slap. She was right. In 1950s America, a separated woman was seen as a shame, a failure. Doors would close to us, sharp tongues would pursue us. And the law almost always favored the husband, the father, the man of the house. It was like trying to escape a trap that held not only the body, but also the soul, dignity, the future. "So we're going to stay here forever?" I asked, my voice choked with despair. "We're going to let him keep doing this to us until—" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. We both knew where that path would end. "No," my mother answered, and there was an unusual firmness in her voice. "Not forever. I'm thinking of something else, a different plan, but it'll take time, and we'll need to be more careful. He can't suspect anything." She didn't tell me anything else that day. Maybe she feared that if I knew too much, I might let something slip. Maybe she wanted to protect me from the responsibility of knowledge. Whatever the reason, I respected her silence, trusting that, for the first time in a long time, maybe there was a thread of hope to hold on to. In the following weeks, I noticed small changes in my mother's behavior. She started going out more to deliver sewing, sometimes taking longer than usual. She began attending church more regularly, not just on Sundays, but also at novenas during the week. And most curious of all, she became excessively attentive to my father, preparing his favorite dishes, praising his work at the sawmill, acting submissive and pleasant, even when he came home drunk and aggressive. I confess that at first I felt betrayed by this change. How could she treat well the man who hurt us so much? How could she smile at him, serve him attentively, when she knew what he did to me on nights when alcohol loosened his moral restraints? One night, I couldn't take it anymore and confronted her while we washed dishes together, my father already passed out in bed in another of his alcoholic stupors. "Why are you being so good to him, Mom?" I whispered, the hurt evident in my voice. "After everything he does?" She looked around, as if checking we were really alone, and then came closer, speaking so low I had to lean in to hear. "Sometimes, daughter, we need to make the wolf believe we're lambs so he'll lower his guard. Never forget that." That phrase, said with a contained intensity that didn't match her usual meekness, echoed in my head for days. What exactly was my mother planning? What kind of strategy was this that required such acting? October arrived, bringing heavy rains that turned the dirt streets of our neighborhood into impassable mud. The roof of our house, old and poorly maintained, started leaking in several spots, forming puddles on the concrete floor of the living room. My father complained constantly, promising to fix it next weekend, but the money that should buy new tiles invariably ended up in liquor bottles at Joe's bar. School was difficult. Even trying hard to pay attention in class, my mind constantly returned home, to the fear of what I would find when I returned, to my mother's mysterious plans. My grades, which were already not good, plummeted even more. Miss Helen called me again, this time with a more serious tone. "Lucilla, if you continue like this, you're going to fail the year. I know you're going through a difficult time at home, but education is your only chance for a better future." Her words were like a distant echo of what my grandfather used to tell me. Education is your only chance. How many times had he repeated this, sitting on the porch while teaching me to read old newspapers? That night, sitting on the edge of my bed, I promised myself that no matter what happened, I wouldn't give up on my studies. It was the only true inheritance my grandfather had left me. The love of knowledge, the belief that books could open doors that even the strongest men couldn't lock. With this new purpose, I started studying whenever my father wasn't home. I took advantage of every minute of his absence to pore over books, memorize formulas, practice the handwriting that cost me so much. It wasn't easy. My mind frequently wandered, thoughts got tangled, constant fear drained my concentration. But I persisted, stubbornly, like little plants that grow in sidewalk cracks. It was in mid-November, on a Friday, especially hot for that time of year, that I realized something important was about to happen. My mother had been restless since early morning, checking the kitchen clock every few minutes, arranging and rearranging things around the house. "Are you going out, Mom?" I asked, puzzled by her behavior. "No," she answered simply, continuing to fold and refold the same tablecloth. "But your father is. It's payday at the sawmill." That partially explained her agitation. Paydays were always the worst. My father would receive his wages, go straight to the bar, and come home in deplorable condition, frequently violent. The money that should support the family half gone or completely exhausted. He arrived around 6 in the evening, his pay envelope in his shirt pocket, the smell of sawdust permeating his clothes, hair, skin. He seemed in good spirits. He had received extra for overtime hours worked and was already talking excitedly about spending part of the money on a new radio. "A man deserves a reward for hard work," he said, counting the bills on the kitchen table. "I'm going to stop by Joe's bar to celebrate, and tomorrow we'll go to town to see this radio." My mother just smiled and agreed, serving the dinner she had prepared with special care. A golden roasted chicken, which we rarely ate because it was expensive, and even a milk pudding for dessert. She herself had dressed up more than usual, wearing the only good dress she owned and even putting on light lipstick. "What's the special occasion?" my father asked, suspicious, but obviously pleased with the attention. "Nothing," my mother replied with a smile. "Just thought you deserved a good dinner after so much work." The same words I had used months ago, on that fateful night after my grandfather's funeral. I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something in my mother's eyes, something calculated, determined. When my father left for the bar, taking most of his pay and leaving only enough for basic weekly shopping, my mother called me over. "Lucilla," she said, holding my hands, "I want you to sleep at Miss Helen's house tonight." "Miss Helen? The teacher? Why?" I asked, confused. "I've already arranged everything with her. You'll say I needed to go take care of a sick aunt in the city and didn't want to leave you alone with your father. She's a good woman. She understood the situation without me needing to explain much." My heart raced in my chest. This wasn't normal. My mother had never sent me to sleep away from home before, not even on the worst nights. "What's happening, Mom? What are you going to do?" She looked away for a moment, took a deep breath, and then looked at me with an intensity she rarely showed. "The less you know, the better for you, daughter. But know one thing. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, our life will be different. The promise I made to you, that one day this would end, will come true sooner than we imagine." I wanted to ask more, insist on details, understand the plan she had been developing during all those months. But there was a determination in her eyes that made me back off. Whatever her plan was, she needed to execute it alone. "Do you trust me?" she asked, squeezing my hands between hers. "I trust you," I replied without hesitation. And I really did trust. Despite everything we had been through, despite the times she hadn't been able to protect me completely, I knew deep in my soul that my mother loved me more than life itself. I packed a small bundle with necessities for spending the night away. A change of clothes, toothbrush, the small rosary that had belonged to my grandfather, and kissed my mother on the forehead before leaving. She hugged me tighter than normal, as if she wanted to keep the feeling of my body close to hers. "Tomorrow, daughter," she whispered in my ear. "Tomorrow we start over." As I walked down the dirt street toward Miss Helen's house, I had the strange feeling that I was saying goodbye to something. Not just that house, that life of fear, but also a version of myself and my mother. What I didn't know at that moment was that, in fact, nothing would be the same when the sun rose the next day. But not for the reasons I imagined, nor in the way my mother had planned. Life, as I've learned so many times throughout my 82 years, has its own way of following its course, regardless of our careful plans. Sometimes, the miracle we've been waiting for comes disguised as tragedy. Sometimes, liberation comes through paths we would never have chosen on our own. And that's exactly what happened on that November night in 1957, when fate finally decided to intercede on our behalf, bringing an unexpected miracle through the hands of chance. Or perhaps, as I like to believe, through the hands of a grandfather who continued caring for his granddaughter, even from the other side of life. I woke up the next morning to loud knocks on the bedroom door, where Miss Helen had accommodated me. The sun had barely risen. A pale light entered through the window, and for a moment I was disoriented, not recognizing where I was. "Lucila, wake up." My teacher's urgent voice brought me back to reality. "Someone is looking for you." My first thought was pure terror. My father had discovered the plan, whatever it was, and had come to get me. I jumped up, my heart hammering so hard in my chest it hurt. But when I opened the door, it wasn't my father who was there. It was Sergeant Miller, the only policeman in our small station, in full uniform with a serious expression. Beside him, Miss Helen looked at me with a mix of compassion and concern that made my blood freeze. "What happened?" I asked, my voice coming out thin, almost inaudible. "Is it my mother?" The sergeant knelt to be at my height, a gesture that, even in the middle of that confusion, seemed strangely kind coming from a man everyone feared for his rigidity. "Lucila," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard, "there was an accident at your house this morning. A fire." "Fire?" The words didn't make immediate sense in my head. Our house was simple, old wood, but we'd never had problems with fire. My mother was extremely careful with the wood stove, with candles when the power went out. "My mother," I managed to say, my throat tightening so much that sound barely came out. "Where is my mother?" I saw the exchange of glances between the sergeant and Miss Helen, that kind of silent communication adults do when they're deciding how to give terrible news to a child. "Your mother is fine," he finally answered, and I felt my legs weaken with relief. "She's at the county hospital with some minor injuries, smoke inhalation, but nothing serious." "And my father?" I asked, though something inside me already knew the answer. Another silence, longer this time. "Your father couldn't get out in time," the sergeant finally said. "When the neighbors saw the fire and went to help, the room where he slept was already completely engulfed in flames." "I'm sorry, Lucila." I don't know exactly what I felt at that moment. It wasn't joy. I would never allow myself to feel joy at someone's death, even someone who had caused me so much suffering. It wasn't exactly sadness either. It was something more complex, a mix of shock, relief, guilt for feeling that relief, and fear of what would come next. "I want to see my mother," was all I could say. "Of course," Miss Helen replied, putting her arm around my shoulders. "I'll take you right now." The trip to the county hospital in Sergeant Miller's Jeep passed like a nebulous dream. I remember the bumps on the dirt road, the smell of cigarettes permeating the cracked leather seat, the adults' voices talking in the front, loose words that my confused mind tried to piece together into some sense. Knocked-over lamp, too drunk to wake up with the smoke smell. Neighbors said they heard screams, but when they arrived, lucky the girl wasn't home. The hospital was a low brick building with a large crucifix at the entrance. Inside, It smelled of disinfectant and something else that I only later identified as the smell of human suffering. We found my mother in a small room she shared with 2 other patients. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. I ran to hug her, noticing the bandages on her arms, the dark soot stain around her nostrils, the smell of smoke that still permeated her hair. "My daughter," she whispered, pressing me against her chest with surprising strength for someone in that state. "Thank God you're okay." We stayed like that for a long time, embraced, without saying anything. There was so much to be said, so many questions to be asked. But at that moment, the simple fact that we were alive, that we were together, seemed miracle enough. When we finally separated, I saw that Sergeant Miller had stayed at the door, watching our reunion with an expression difficult to decipher. Miss Helen had sat in a chair in the corner, discreetly wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "Mrs. Grace," the sergeant said, approaching the bed, "I know you're still recovering, but I need to ask some questions about the fire." My mother nodded, her face taking on a serene, almost resigned expression. "From what we've been able to understand so far, your husband came home from the bar around midnight, quite intoxicated. Can you confirm this?" "Yes," my mother replied, her voice hoarse from inhaled smoke. "He had received his paycheck from the sawmill and went to celebrate at the bar, like he did every month." "And were you alone at home? The girl was already at the teacher's house?" "Yes. I asked Lucila to spend the night out because—" She hesitated, looking briefly at me. "Because Walter was more difficult on nights after getting paid." The sergeant nodded, as if he perfectly understood what she meant without needing the sordid details. "And how did the fire start, from what you remember?" My mother looked away, fixing it on the window that showed a piece of blue sky. "Walter was so drunk he could barely stand," she began, speaking slowly, as if reliving each moment in memory. "I helped him lie down, took off his shoes. He had spilled a bottle of liquor on the bedroom floor. Everything was soaked. I lit a lamp because the power had gone out, as always happens when it rains hard. I put it on the nightstand and went to the kitchen to get a cloth to clean the floor." She stopped, breathing deeply, as if the next words were especially difficult. "When I got back to the room, the lamp had fallen on the bed. I don't know if he hit it when turning over, or if it was the wind through the window I left open. I just know that when I saw it, the fire was already spreading across the mattress, the curtains. I tried to put it out. I swear I tried. I threw water, beat it with the rug, called for Walter to help me, but he wouldn't wake up." Her voice failed, and for a moment I thought she would cry. But when she raised her face again, her eyes were dry, determined. "When I saw I couldn't control the fire, I ran outside to ask the neighbors for help. Mr. Johnson tried to go in to save Walter, but the flames had already taken over the whole room. There was nothing more to be done." The sergeant wrote everything down in his small notebook, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he closed the notebook and put it in his pocket. "Well, everything indicates it was a tragic accident," he concluded, "especially considering your husband's history with drinking. I don't doubt the fire department report from Columbus will confirm this version when they finish the investigation." Something in that "I don't doubt" made me look more carefully at the sergeant's face. There was an implicit understanding in his words, an almost convenient acceptance of the story. It was only many years later, when I was already an adult, and Sergeant Miller had already retired, that he confessed to me, during a chance meeting at Sunday Mass, that he never completely believed the story of the knocked-over lamp, that he had seen suspicious marks that the fire could have started at more than one point in the house, that he found it strange that my mother had sent me to spend the night out on that exact date. "But you know, Lucila," he told me on that occasion, decades later, "back then there was no domestic violence law, no women's police station. What there were men like your father who beat their wives and daughters, drank all the household money, and nobody did anything. Sometimes justice needs to come through crooked paths when the straight paths are blocked. But on that day in the hospital in 1957, I was just a confused girl, trying to understand what had really happened, what my mother had or hadn't done, and what would become of us from then on. "I'll arrange the necessary documentation," the sergeant said before leaving. "You'll need a death certificate to resolve pension issues at the sawmill. Your husband worked registered, so you have rights." Pension. a word that opened possibilities we had never considered real. Money that would come every month, that would be ours, that no one would spend on drinks or gambling. After the sergeant and Miss Helen left, we were alone in the room. The other patients had been taken for exams, giving us a rare moment of privacy. "Mom?" I began, hesitant, my voice so low it was almost a whisper. "What really happened last night?" She held my hand tightly, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity I rarely saw. "Exactly what I told the sergeant," she replied, her voice firm despite the hoarseness. "A terrible accident, a tragedy that could have been avoided if your father didn't drink so much. A lamp knocked over in the wrong place at the wrong time." There was something in her gaze, a silent request for me to accept this version, to never question, never doubt, never look for a different truth. "And now, what will become of us?" I asked, changing the subject, respecting that unspoken request. Her expression softened, a small smile appearing on her chapped lips. "Now, my daughter, we're going to live, really, for the first time. The house is gone, but we'll build another one with the insurance money your father had through the sawmill and with the pension. A small house, but ours. You'll continue studying, you'll graduate, you'll be someone in life like your grandfather always wanted. And you, Mom? I'll continue sewing, but now I can charge fair prices, not just what your father allowed. I can save money without fear. I can sleep without terror, wake up without new bruises. I can breathe, Lucila. After so many years, I can finally breathe." In that hospital bed, injured, covered in soot, with a voice hoarse from inhaled smoke, my mother never seemed so strong, so beautiful, so alive. 3 days later, she was discharged. Since our house had been completely destroyed by the fire, Miss Helen took us in temporarily. News of my father's tragic death spread quickly through the small town. Reactions were varied. Some people showed genuine grief, others barely disguised relief. Many feigned surprise at an outcome that deep down everyone expected for a man who lived as he did. The funeral was brief. Few attended. Some colleagues from the sawmill, the owner of the bar where he spent his salary, 2 or 3 distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. My mother, in black, remained silent throughout the ceremony, her face covered by a thin veil that hid whatever emotion she might or might not be feeling. I didn't shed tears. Not even one. At that moment, looking at the simple coffin descending into the earth in the small town cemetery, I felt neither hatred nor love, just a strange emptiness, as if a page had been definitively turned, a dark chapter closed forever. What none of us knew at that moment was that while one chapter closed, another, brighter, more hopeful, was just beginning. A chapter that would take me on paths that not even in my wildest dreams could I have imagined. A chapter that truly began a few days after the funeral, when the sawmill's lawyer called us to deal with legal matters. It was there that we discovered something surprising. My father, despite all his faults, had kept up to date the life insurance offered by the company. Insurance that, added to accident compensation and the monthly pension we were entitled to, gave us not just immediate stability, but the concrete possibility of a dignified new beginning. It seems that even in his worst acts, God finds a way to transform into blessing, my mother commented when we left the lawyer's office, a substantial check in hand and the promise of a monthly payment that would allow us to live without luxury, but with dignity. That same day, as we walked down the main street of town, we passed in front of a small house with a for sale sign. It was a simple construction, made of brick, with a small yard where a dogwood tree grew. My mother stopped, looked at it for a long time, and then did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She smiled a complete smile, one that reached her eyes. "What do you think, Lucila? Could it be our new home?" A week later, the house was ours. Small, simple, but ours. The first place we could truly call home, without fear, without violence, without the constant weight of oppression. And it was in that little house, under that dogwood tree that witnessed so many afternoons of study, so many shared dreams, so much laughter finally free, that my mother and I began to rebuild not just our lives, but our souls. It was there that I learned that sometimes miracles don't arrive with the sound of trumpets or angel choirs. Sometimes they come silently, disguised as tragedies, as accidents, as coincidences. They come in a fallen lamp on a windy night at the exact moment we need them most. And it was there, in that small but light-filled house, that my mother taught me the greatest lesson of all, that justice, when it doesn't come from the hands of men, sometimes needs to come from the hands of those who suffer most, even if the price is carrying forever the weight of a secret that can never be completely revealed. Because some secrets, my dear ones who watch me, are not made to be told. They are made to be kept in the silence of the heart, taken to the grave as a last act of protection for those we love. And if today, at 82 years old, my legitimate last year of life, with few months ahead, I decided to finally tell this story, it's not to judge what was done or not done on that distant November night. It's just so you know that even in the darkest nights, even when all doors seem closed, a silent miracle may be forming in the shadows, waiting for the exact moment to reveal itself. They say God writes straight with crooked lines. In my journey, those lines were so crooked they almost broke, but divine writing continued, relentless, guiding my path to a destiny I never imagined possible for a poor girl from small-town Indiana. The spring of 1958 brought more than flowers to our new life. It brought possibilities. With the insurance funds and pension, my mother managed to set up a small sewing workshop in the living room of our new house. It wasn't anything grand, just a Singer machine better than the old one, a wooden mannequin, some pieces of good fabric, but it represented something more valuable than money: independence. Grace's Tailoring, said the modest sign we put in front of the house. Soon the town's women began to appear, first out of curiosity, then in recognition of the quality of work. My mother had blessed hands for transforming fabrics into dreams. Wedding dresses that made young women sigh. Baby trousseaux that filled expectant mothers' eyes with hope. Well-cut suits that gave dignity to simple men on special occasions. I helped after school, gradually learning the secrets of needle and thread. But my mother always insisted, "You can help me, but your studies come first. Your obligation isn't to fabrics, it's to books." And to books I dedicated myself with a passion that surprised even my teacher. Miss Helen continued to be an important presence in our life. After classes, she frequently invited me to stay a little longer, lent me books from her small personal library, corrected my texts with attention that went far beyond professional obligation. It was she who first noticed my talent for drawing, an inheritance from my grandfather that I cultivated secretly, drawing imaginary houses, impossible buildings, entire cities that existed only in my head. "This isn't just a hobby, Lucilla," she told me one day, observing my drawings of fantastic mansions I made in notebook margins. "You have an eye for spaces, for forms. Have you thought about architecture?" Architecture. The word sounded like music to my ears. Until then, my dreams were nebulous. I knew I wanted to study, be someone in life, as my grandfather said, but I didn't have a concrete goal, a defined path to follow. "But that's a course for rich people, isn't it, teacher?" I asked, the skepticism of poverty already impregnated in my worldview, even at 15 years old. "It's a difficult course, yes," she acknowledged, "but not impossible. There are scholarships, public universities, and you're intelligent enough, Lucilla. I believe in that." Someone believing in me, in my capabilities, was such a new, comforting feeling that same night, when I returned home, I told my mother about this conversation, about this newly discovered dream. I expected hesitation, maybe even a gentle reminder of our financial reality. Instead, I saw her eyes shine with a determination I knew well. "If that's what you want, my daughter, then that's what it will be," she said, her calloused hands holding mine. "I'll work double, I'll save every penny, but you're going to do this degree." What followed were years of hard work, hers at the sewing machine, often until late at night, mine with books, studying far beyond what school required. I finished middle school as valedictorian, an achievement we celebrated with a simple cornbread cake, but with hearts overflowing with pride. High school would have to be attended in the neighboring city, larger, an hour away by bus. The extra expense with transportation tightened our budget even more, but my mother never complained. "It's investment, not expense," she always said when I expressed concern about money. It was in this new school, more demanding, with teachers trained at the state's best universities, that my horizon really expanded. There I met new ideas, authors I'd never heard of, sciences I didn't even know existed. There I also encountered the first serious resistance to my dreams. Architecture? The math teacher laughed when I mentioned my goal during a geometry class. Girl, there are no women architects around here. It's a profession for men. Why don't you think about something more suitable like elementary school teacher or nurse? Those words hurt like a slap, bringing back memories of my father, of how he always insisted my place was in the kitchen, not with books. For a moment, the old fear returned, the feeling of inadequacy, of not belonging. But then I remembered the promise I had made to my grandfather years ago, under the apple tree, that I would never let them tell me what I couldn't do. I also remembered my mother's words on the night of the fire. "We're going to live, really." "With all due respect, sir," I replied, my voice firmer than I ever thought myself capable of. "If there are no women architects around here, then I'll be the first." The entire room fell silent. Some classmates laughed quietly. Others looked at me with astonishment. But in the eyes of some girls, I saw something different. A gleam of admiration, maybe even hope. The teacher, surprisingly, didn't get angry. After class, he called me aside and said, "If you really want this, you'll need to be better than any man in the room, twice as good. It's unfair, but it's reality." That conversation, instead of discouraging me, lit an even stronger flame in me. I began studying mathematics and physics with almost obsessive dedication. I started frequenting the municipal library on weekends, devouring books about architectural history, about the world's great constructions, about basic engineering principles. It was also at this time that religion entered more strongly into my life. Our small town was deeply Protestant, and I had always gone to church on Sundays with my mother, more out of habit than conviction. But after everything we lived through, after the miracle that freed us, I began seeking a deeper connection with faith. There was a small chapel near our house where an elderly pastor, Pastor Anthony, held services on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I began attending these less crowded services, attracted by the quietness of the place, by the possibility of really talking to God without the distraction of a full church. Pastor Anthony noticed my constant presence and, one day after service, called me for a conversation. He was a simple man, with calloused hands like my grandfather's, blue eyes faded by time, and wisdom that came not from seminary books, but from the hard life he had led before being called to ministry. "What are you seeking with such thirst, child?" he asked me in that first conversation. "Understanding, Pastor," I answered honestly. "I want to understand why God allows so much suffering, only to bring liberation in such unexpected ways." He smiled, as if recognizing in my vague words something very specific. "God doesn't cause suffering, daughter. He just weaves good from the twisted threads that we humans create with our free will, our ability to choose right or wrong." Those words touched something deep in me. In the following weeks and months, I returned several times to talk with the pastor. I never explicitly told about my father's abuse, about the suspicious fire, about the secrets my mother and I carried. But somehow, between the lines of our conversations about faith, forgiveness, and divine justice, I feel he understood. It was he who gave me my first own Bible, a small black-covered edition I still keep today, the pages yellowed by time, marked by my youthful annotations. It was also he who taught me to pray, not just with memorized words, but with my heart. True faith, he told me once, isn't believing God will do everything as we want. It's trusting that no matter what happens, He'll be with us, guiding, sustaining, transforming even the worst situations into opportunities for growth. This deeper understanding of spirituality helped me process past traumas, to forgive, not because what had happened was forgivable, but because forgiveness was necessary for my own liberation, so I could move forward without the weight of hatred. In 1961, at 18 years old, I took the entrance exam for the Architecture and Urban Planning School at Indiana University. It was an almost impossible dream for a girl from the countryside, daughter of a seamstress, without connections or resources for expensive prep courses. On the day of the test, my mother woke up before dawn to prepare a hearty breakfast. To feed that privileged brain, she said, putting on the table corn cake, homemade bread, fruits, a simple banquet, but made with so much love it moved me. Before leaving, she gave me something wrapped in a silk handkerchief, the only valuable object she owned, a gift from when she was young. "What's this, Mom?" I asked, unwrapping the package. It was a medal of St. Joseph, the patron saint of workers, homes, fathers, the saint my grandfather always invoked in his prayers. "It was your grandfather's," she explained, her eyes shining with contained tears. "He said St. Joseph protected him at work, gave him strength in difficult times. I want you to take it with you today, so he can be present somehow in this important moment." I pinned the medal inside my blouse, feeling the cold metal against my skin like a promise, a connection with the man who first believed in my potential, even when I was too small to understand what that meant. The test was difficult, exhausting, testing not just specific knowledge, but also mental resistance. When I left, I wasn't sure of the result. I only knew I had given my best, that I had answered each question with the determination of someone who knows this might be the only chance. The weeks of waiting were torturous. My mother pretended to be calm, but I saw her lighting candles, praying more than usual, looking anxiously at the mail every time the mailman approached. When the letter from the university finally arrived, my hands were shaking so much I could barely open the envelope. My mother was beside me, as nervous as I was, but trying to stay strong, as she always did. "Whatever God wants," she said, squeezing my hand. "If it's not this time, we'll try again next year." But it was that time. The words "approved" and "classified" jumped from the paper like a victory cry. Not only had I passed, I had achieved one of the best placements, guaranteeing a spot in the day period, the most competitive. My mother let out a scream that must have been heard throughout the block. She hugged me so tightly we almost fell, and then we started dancing around the room, laughing and crying at the same time, scaring even the cat sleeping on the couch. "Your grandfather is seeing this from heaven," she said through tears of joy. "He's proud of the granddaughter he has." That night, we did something we had never done. We went out to dinner. Not to a fancy restaurant, our town didn't even have that, but to the only diner in the central square. We ordered the most expensive dish on the menu, a steak with fries that we shared between us, and a cold Coca-Cola, a rare luxury in those times. "To the future architect of the family," my mother toasted with her glass of soda, her eyes shining with pride. "To the best mother in the world," I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat, "who made the impossible happen for me to get here." But the biggest challenge was yet to come. The university was in Bloomington, almost 100 miles from our little town. Moving to the city would require money we didn't have, a separation we had never experienced. "How are we going to do it, Mom?" I asked that same night, the initial euphoria giving way to practical concerns. "We'll find a way," she replied with that calm certainty that always impressed me. "We always have, haven't we?" And we did. In the following months, my mother worked even more at the workshop, accepting extra orders, sewing until late hours. I got a part-time job at the town's only stationery store, saving every cent of the small salary. The community, surprisingly, also mobilized to help. When news of my acceptance at IU spread, we became a kind of local celebrity. "Grace's girl, who's going to be an architect in Bloomington," people said with a mix of astonishment and pride, as if my achievement were somehow a collective victory for the small town. Pastor Anthony organized a raffle to help with initial expenses. The owner of the stationery store where I worked donated school supplies. Miss Helen gave me a new suitcase for the move. Even Sergeant Miller contributed, showing up at home one day with an envelope containing money for the first month's rent. That solidarity showed me that despite all the difficulties, despite the traumas and losses, I had been blessed in many ways, with an extraordinary mother, with true friends, with a community that, in its simple way, recognized the value of education and effort. In February 1962, I boarded the bus to Bloomington, carrying a suitcase of simple clothes, school supplies, the Bible the pastor had given me, my grandfather's St. Joseph medal, and a heart divided between excitement for the future and the pain of leaving my mother behind. "It's not goodbye," she told me at the bus station, holding my face between her hands as she did when I was little. "It's just see you later. I'll visit whenever I can, and you come back on holidays. And when you graduate, who knows? Maybe you'll open your office right here, build beautiful houses for our people. In the first months in Bloomington, I lived in a modest boarding house near campus, sharing a room with two other students, one in medicine and another in literature. The culture shock was immense. The big city, with its imposing buildings, its frantic rhythm, its anonymous crowds, was a completely different world from peaceful Millbrook. College also represented an enormous challenge. I was one of the few women in the architecture course, and certainly one of the only ones from humble origins. Most of my classmates came from wealthy families, had studied at the best schools, traveled abroad, personally knew the architectural wonders I had only seen in books. In the first days, I felt so out of place, so inadequate, that I thought about giving up. I wrote an anguished letter to my mother, confessing my insecurities, my fear of not being up to that environment. Her response arrived a week later, and I still keep the paper yellowed by time. My dear daughter, the fear you feel is natural. Big things always cause fear at first. I remember when you learned to walk. You fell, cried, but got up and tried again, until one day you were running around the yard without even thinking about the previous falls. This college is your new challenge, but you have within you strength much greater than you imagine. A strength forged in difficulties that these rich classmates of yours have never known. They may have traveled the world, but you survived hell and came out of it with your head held high. That, my daughter, is an advantage that no money can buy. As for not feeling up to it, remember, you passed the same test as them, sat in the same room, answered the same questions. Your place in that college wasn't given. It was earned. Now take a deep breath, raise your head, and show them, and especially yourself, what Lucilla Marie Sanders is capable of. With all my love and pride, your mother. That letter changed something fundamental in me. I taped it to the wall of the boarding house room, and in moments of doubt, which were not few, I reread my mother's words, rekindling the flame of determination. The college years were intense, challenging, transformative. I studied more than everyone, slept less than most, took advantage of every learning opportunity. On weekends, when my classmates went out to parties, I stayed in the library, devouring books not just about architecture, but about art, history, philosophy, building the knowledge I hadn't had the chance to acquire before. In the third year, I got a research scholarship that eased the financial pressure a bit. In the fourth, I began interning at a small architecture office, gaining practical experience and some extra money that allowed me to rent a room just for myself, small but private. My mother came to visit me every 3 months, always bringing a homemade corn cake, clothes she sewed especially for me, and the unconditional love that was always my greatest strength. During vacations, I went back to Millbrook, helped at the workshop, reunited with the few friends who remained in town, visited Pastor Anthony for long conversations about faith and life purpose. It was during these college years that my faith deepened even more. In Bloomington, I began attending a young Christians group at the church near the boarding house. There, I found not only spiritual comfort, but also true friendships, people who shared my essential values, even having completely different life stories from mine. In December 1966, at 23 years old, I graduated in architecture and urban planning from Indiana University. On graduation day, when they called my name and I went up on stage to receive the diploma, I saw my mother in the audience, elegant in a navy blue dress she had sewn for the occasion, her eyes teary, her hands applauding with such enthusiasm it seemed to want to compensate for the absence of my grandfather, of the father who never valued me, of all who didn't believe that moment was possible. When I came down from the stage, with the diploma in my hands, I walked directly to her, ignoring protocols, classmates, professors. I knelt before her, not in submission, but in reverence, and placed the diploma in her hands. "It's yours too," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Every sleepless night at the sewing machine, every sacrifice you made, every time you chose my future over your comfort, it's all here, in this paper." She took the diploma with trembling hands, looked at it as if it were something too precious to touch, and then returned it to me, saying only, "No, daughter, it's yours by right and merit. I just did what any loving mother would do." But we both knew it wasn't true. She had done much more than any mother. She had sacrificed everything, risked everything, to give me a chance she never had herself. After graduation, I received offers to stay in Bloomington, work in established offices, follow the promising career that was opening before me. But my heart belonged to the countryside, to the small town where my journey began, where my grandfather was buried, where my mother waited for me. I returned to Millbrook and opened my own architecture office, the first in town, and certainly the first led by a woman in that entire region. At first, clients were few and suspicious. A woman architect? Does she really understand construction? I heard in whispers on the streets, but soon talent spoke louder than prejudice. My first works, simple but functional and beautiful houses, began attracting attention. Projects increased, reputation consolidated. In a few years I had clients not just from my town, but from the entire region. My mother, already in her 50s, continued sewing, but now for pleasure, not necessity. We bought a bigger house, with a special room for her workshop, another for my office. We planted a dogwood tree in the yard, in honor of the one that marked our new beginning after the tragedy. In 1970, I met John Paul, a civil engineer who came from Indianapolis to work on the construction of the town's new bus terminal. He was a good man, kind, respectful, so different from my father that sometimes I wondered if they were really of the same species. We married in 1972, in a simple ceremony at the same church where I talked with Pastor Anthony years before. It was he, in fact, already elderly but still lucid, who celebrated our union, blessing with trembling hands the beginning of this new phase of my life. John Paul agreed to live with us, in the house I shared with my mother, an unusual arrangement for the time, but that worked perfectly for us. He respected her space, valued her life wisdom, treated her as an essential part of the family we were building. In the following years, we were blessed with 2 children, Grace Marie in honor of my mother, and Joseph in honor of my grandfather. I raised them with the values I learned throughout this difficult journey: the importance of education, the transformative power of faith, and mainly the inestimable value of respect for oneself and for others. My career flourished. I designed houses, schools, small commercial buildings, always seeking to create spaces that not only sheltered bodies, but also nourished souls. I became known for an architecture that respected local traditions, but brought subtle innovations, improvements that made a difference in people's lives. My mother lived to see all this. She lived to cradle my children in her lap, to tell them stories, to see them grow strong and secure, free from the fear that marked my own childhood. She lived to see her daughter respected, fulfilled, complete. She lived to see the fruit of her sacrifice, her courage, her unconditional love. When she departed, in 1993, at 85 years old, it was serenely, in her sleep, like someone closing their eyes after a long journey well completed. At her funeral, the entire town attended, not out of obligation or social convention, but out of genuine respect for that simple woman who, with needle and thread, not only sewed clothes, but also mended destinies. Today, at 82 years old, the same age my mother was when she discovered cancer was consuming her, I look back and see a path that, despite the stones, unexpected curves, lurking abysses, always went forward, always found light even in the darkest moments. And if now, with few months of life ahead according to doctors, I decided to share this story, it's not to seek sympathy or absolution. It's to remind all the people who watch me, especially women, that even in the most desperate situations, there's always a way out, a new beginning, a chance to rewrite one's own destiny. If you're going through something difficult now, know that you're not alone. If you're living your own personal hell, know there's hope beyond the flames. If you feel that life has given you a burden too heavy to carry, know that God doesn't give us burdens we can't bear. And when they seem unbearable, He Himself sends angels in disguise to help carry them. I'm going to take advantage of these last months to be grateful for everything: the blessings and trials, the joys and pains, the people I loved, and even those who hurt me, because all of them brought me here, formed the woman I am. Before ending our conversation, I wanted to ask that, if this story touched your heart, leave your amen in the comments. This gives me strength in these final days of my journey. And if you can, click that like button my granddaughter said is important for more people to know this story. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. My granddaughter posts various testimonies from other ladies like me, stories of pain, overcoming, faith. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales if you haven't already. May God bless each one of you, my dear ones. May the peace that now inhabits my heart, even facing the certainty of the near end, also find dwelling in your hearts. And may you never forget, sometimes the most extraordinary miracles begin with a simple act of courage.